Imagine being so good at your position that you make it look easy. So easy that people often overlook your contribution to your team. No position has more of that than wide receiver. The receiver position has one of the deepest talent pools in the league, so much so that some of the most talented players in the position have been criminally underrated. Today, I wanted to go over the most underrated wide receivers in league history and break down how good they truly were and why they don't deserve to be forgotten. They called it the Monday Night Miracle in Dallas, but for Santana Moss, it was just another chance to remind the world he never needed much time. Just a sliver of space. Down 13 points. Under 2 minutes left. The crowd was roaring for the Cowboys. Then, silence. One deep shot. Moss, touchdown. Then another. Moss again. Game over. The man was 5'10", barely 190 pounds. But in moments like that, he played like a giant. It wasn't just speed. It was timing. It was terror. And for defenders, it was too late before they even knew he was coming. Moss entered the league in 2001, a first-round pick from the University of Miami, where he had already made a name skywalking over corners and returning punts like he had jet fuel in his cleats. Expectations were sky high, but his rookie season was derailed by injury. People wrote him off before he ever really got started. He bounced back with the Jets, slashing brilliance on returns and deep routes, but never quite got the national spotlight. Then came the trade to Washington in 2005, and everything changed. That year, Moss exploded. 1,483 yards, a Pro Bowl nod, the single-season franchise record for receiving yards. He wasn't just productive, he was clutch. Whether it was a crucial third down or a double move with the game on the line, Moss made his living breaking hearts. His routes were sharp, his hands were dependable, and when he got into space, defenders didn't catch him, they chased shadows. But maybe the most shocking part? He did it for years. From 2005 through 2010, Moss averaged over 70 catches and more than 950 yards per season. That stretch includes a year where Washington cycled through quarterbacks like a turnstile, yet Moss still posted over 1,100 yards. He wasn't playing with Hall of Famers under center, he wasn't in a high-flying offense. He was surviving, producing, thriving. When you line up his career numbers, over 10,000 receiving yards, 66 total touchdowns, they match or exceed several receivers who've already been enshrined in Canton. Lynn Swann, Drew Pearson, Harold Carmichael. Santana Moss wasn't a flash in the pan, he was a fire that never stopped burning, even if it didn't always light up the national stage. He never courted controversy, never made headlines for the wrong reasons. But maybe that's part of why he's so overlooked. He wasn't loud, he just showed up and did the job better than most. And in a league that often rewards flash over consistency, Moss became a master of being underappreciated. His legacy? It's not a statue or a gold jacket, at least not yet. It's that feeling. When the ball is in the air, the defense thinks they've got it covered, and then out of nowhere, here comes Moss. And just like that, everything changes. Which brings us to the next name on our list, another silent assassin the league forgot. There's a haunting kind of silence that surrounds Harold Jackson's legacy. Not the silence of someone who failed, the silence of someone who succeeded too quietly for anyone to remember. In 1973, Jackson led the NFL in receiving yards. Again. It wasn't his first time. It wasn't even his second. By the end of his career, he had 5 Pro Bowls, 2 receiving yard titles, and more catches, more yards, and more touchdowns than nearly anyone who'd ever played the position, and yet, when fans list the greats of the era, Stallworth, Swann, Biletnikoff, Jackson's name rarely crosses their lips. But maybe that's because his greatness came wrapped in soft-spoken modesty, not highlight real theatrics. Jackson entered the league in 1968 as a 12th round pick, not a typo, 12 rounds deep. Drafted by the Rams, barely noticed, almost forgotten, but it didn't take long for him to make them regret letting him go. After being traded to the Eagles, Jackson erupted. In 1969, he led the entire league in receiving yards. The very next season, he hauled in 1,116 yards and 9 touchdowns, back when throwing the ball 20 times a game was considered aggressive. He wasn't just fast, he was blazing. Defensive backs couldn't keep up. He stretched the field vertically in ways few receivers could, and when the ball came his way, he didn't drop it. Jackson averaged 17.4 yards per reception for his entire career. That's not a typo either. He was a walking big play. By the time he retired, Jackson had 579 receptions, 10,372 yards, and 76 touchdowns. At the moment he stepped off the field for good, he ranked second all-time in receiving yards, behind only Don Maynard. Second in history, and yet his name is barely whispered when we talk about the Hall of Fame. How is that possible? Part of the answer lies in timing. Jackson's career spanned a strange period in NFL history. He wasn't part of the 1970s Steelers dynasty, so he didn't benefit from championship spotlight. He wasn't catching passes from Joe Namath or Roger Staubach. He was doing his damage with guys like Roman Gabriel and Ron Jaworski. Good quarterbacks, sure, but not the kind who put receivers in Canton by association. And then there's the matter of perception. Jackson was consistent, but never loud. Dependable, but never dramatic. He didn't trash talk, he didn't demand trades, he just produced. For 16 seasons, across multiple teams, with different systems, different quarterbacks, same results. If Harold Jackson had put up those numbers today, over 10,000 yards, nearly 80 touchdowns, 5 Pro Bowls, he'd be a shoo-in for Canton. Instead, he's become a trivia question, a hidden chapter in NFL history. But forgotten speed still leaves a trail. And if you look closely at the record books, Harold Jackson's fingerprints are everywhere. Next, we turn to a wideout whose brilliance was anything but quiet, and whose numbers scream for recognition. He was never supposed to be the star. Not at 5'9", not out of James Madison, not from the USFL, but Gary Clark never cared much for expectations. He just outran them. When he stepped onto the NFL stage in 1985, Clark didn't walk in with hype. He brought fire. And for over a decade, he scorched secondaries, tore through zones, and carved up defenses with the kind of reckless precision that left even the best corners guessing. He wasn't a spotlight guy. He was a street fighter in cleats. And yet, when Washington needed a big play, when the pocket was collapsing and the pressure was suffocating, the ball always seemed to find Gary Clark. From the start, he made it impossible to look away. As a rookie, he racked up over 70 catches and 900 yards. The next year, he broke the 1,200-yard mark, then 1,300. He did it again in 1991 and again in 1992. Through clutch playoff performances, injuries, quarterback changes, Clark just kept producing. You could hit him high, you could hit him low. He'd bounce off the turf, pop his helmet back on, and run it again. He wasn't just reliable, he was relentless. In 11 seasons, Clark hauled in 699 receptions for 10,856 yards and 65 touchdowns. Those numbers, more yards than Michael Irvin, more catches than Don Maynard. His production wasn't just elite, it was historic, and yet you rarely hear his name mentioned alongside those gold-jacketed peers. Part of it is the era. The 80s and early 90s were crowded with Hall of Fame storylines. Montana and Rice, Marino and the Marx Brothers, the Cowboys dynasty. In Washington, even Clark's own brilliance was sometimes lost in the glow of the posse, the iconic trio of Clark, Art Monk, and Ricky Sanders. Monk got the headlines, Sanders got the flair, but Clark, he got open over and over again, and when the stage was biggest, he was at his best. In Super Bowl 22, while Doug Williams was making history, Clark was the engine underneath it. He pulled in 3 catches for 55 yards and a score in a 42-point explosion. Then in Super Bowl 26, he did it again. 7 catches, 114 yards, and a championship that never would have happened without him. His hands were dependable, his routes were fearless, and his timing, impeccable. But despite 2 Super Bowl rings, 4 Pro Bowl selections, and Hall of Fame caliber numbers, Gary Clark remains outside the gates of Canton. Maybe because he never made noise off the field, maybe because he didn't play politics, he just lined up, played hurt, and delivered greatness without asking for applause. He was the receiver no one planned for, the one who hurt you anyway, the one who didn't look the part but played it better than almost anyone, and still he waits. Coming up, we look at a wideout whose journey through pain, redemption, and highlight reel heroics has left a permanent mark on the league, whether the Hall recognizes it or not. He was never the fastest, never the flashiest, never the first name on the marquee. But Keenan McCardell made a career out of surviving, then thriving in a league that chews up and spits out wide receivers. He didn't just hang on, he evolved, refined, and built a resume so durable, so quietly spectacular, that it demands a second look. Because for all the stars that burned hot and faded, McCardell just kept showing up and producing. He came into the league in 1991, a 12th round pick by Washington. 12 rounds. In today's game, he would have never been drafted at all. He didn't catch a single pass that first year and was out of football by 92. For most players, that would have been the end. But McCardell didn't do quit. He rebuilt his game and his body, biding his time until the expansion Jacksonville Jaguars came calling. That's when everything changed. By 1996, McCardell had blossomed into one of the league's most dependable targets, posting 85 receptions for over 1,100 yards and helping lead Jacksonville to a stunning AFC Championship appearance in just their second year of existence. But it wasn't just the stats, it was how he played. He ran routes like a surgeon, found soft spots in zones like a veteran quarterback. When the ball hit his hands, it stuck. Then came the pairing that changed everything: Keenan McCardell and Jimmy Smith. They became one of the most dangerous duos of their era, a balance of precision and explosion that tore through defenses across the late 90s. Smith got the deep shots, the acclaim. McCardell worked underneath, took the hits, and moved the chains. He was the quiet heartbeat of an offense that routinely kept Jacksonville in contention. But his legacy wasn't limited to one city. In 2002, now with Tampa Bay, McCardell played a pivotal role in one of the most dominant Super Bowl runs in NFL history. In Super Bowl 37, under the blinding lights and suffocating pressure, he delivered twice, becoming just the third player in history to catch 2 touchdowns in the big game. Not bad for someone once considered too slow, too average, too late round to matter. By the time he retired, McCardell had racked up 883 receptions, 11,373 yards, and 63 touchdowns. That's more catches than Hall of Famers like Michael Irvin and Steve Largent, more yards than Fred Biletnikoff, a longer career than most of his peers, and he did it all without ever being the #1 option, the fastest guy on the field or the face of a franchise. So why is Keenan McCardell still waiting for Canton? Maybe because consistency isn't sexy. Maybe because he played across too many teams. Maybe because he didn't beg for the spotlight. But go ask any defensive back who tried to stay with him. Ask any quarterback who leaned on him. Keenan McCardell was a craftsman, a survivor, and above all else, a winner. Next, we spotlight a receiver who made noise from day one, but whose Hall of Fame case is still frustratingly stuck in neutral. He never screamed for attention. He didn't have the viral catches, the flashy celebrations, or the dream team offenses, but Derrick Mason carved out one of the most prolific receiving careers of the modern era by doing one thing better than almost anyone: working. And somehow, despite the numbers, despite the longevity, despite the impact, his name still floats in the shadows of the Hall of Fame conversation like a ghost no one can quite place. Mason's journey began in 1997, a 4th-round pick out of Michigan State taken by the Tennessee Oilers, yes, before they were even the Titans. Early on, he made his mark as a return man, not a receiver. For most players, that would have been the ceiling: special teams duty, a flash here and there, then a fade into the background. But Mason had bigger plans. By the early 2000s, he had transformed. No longer a gadget guy, he was now a trusted full-time threat. In 2003, he exploded for 95 receptions and 1,303 yards, helping carry a Titans offense that leaned on grit more than star power. And that was no fluke. The following year, he posted another 96 catches and crossed the 1,000-yard mark once again. Mason had officially arrived, not as a highlight reel, but as a weapon you had to account for every single down. Then came the move to Baltimore, a team long known for elite defenses but desperate for any kind of offensive rhythm. Mason became the anchor. Through quarterback changes and offensive retools, he remained the steadying force. Between 2007 and 2009, as he approached his mid-30s, Mason still hauled in nearly 1,000 yards each season. The man refused to slow down. By the end of his career, Derrick Mason had compiled 943 receptions, 12,061 receiving yards, and 66 touchdowns. That's more catches than Art Monk, more yards than Charlie Joyner. He's one of just a handful of receivers in NFL history with 8 1,000-yard seasons. Yet somehow, he's rarely, if ever, mentioned in the same breath as those Hall of Fame peers. Why? Maybe it's because he never had a season with 10 or more touchdowns. Maybe it's because he split his prime across 2 franchises that never quite captured the national imagination. Or maybe it's because his brilliance was quiet, methodical, even surgical. No circus acts, just separation, sure hands, and first downs. But the tape tells the truth. Derrick Mason wasn't a product of a system, he was the system. Quarterbacks trusted him, coaches leaned on him, defenses feared him whether they said it or not. You don't luck your way into nearly 950 catches. You don't stumble into 12,000 yards. You get there by showing up every Sunday, running crisp routes, taking hits, and making the catch anyway. And still, he waits. He smiled when he blocked you. That's what made it worse. You'd be a cornerback or maybe a linebacker thinking you had the angle, thinking you'd shed your man and get to the ball, and then crack. Hines Ward, helmet in your chest, hands inside. And that grin, always that grin. He played wide receiver, but he hit like a linebacker. He didn't run away from contact, he invited it. He made it part of his game, part of his identity. And in doing so, he became one of the most unique and feared wideouts of his era. But for all the hits, the blocks, the big moments, the Hall of Fame still hasn't called. Ward was drafted in 1998, a third rounder out of Georgia with no ACL in his left knee and no clear position. He wasn't a burner, he wasn't a polished route technician, he was a tweener, a utility guy. Pittsburgh took him anyway, and as he always did, Ward found a way to matter. By his third season, he was a starter. By his fourth, he was a Pro Bowler. For 8 straight years, he led the Steelers in receptions, he broke tackles, he broke records, and eventually, he broke through every doubt anyone had about him. In 2002, he posted 112 catches for 1,329 yards and 12 touchdowns, a season as dominant as any in the league that year. He topped 1,000 receiving yards in 4 separate seasons, with 5 more just under the mark. He was consistent, tough, and always there when the team needed him most. But Hines Ward's legacy was written in the postseason. That's where he shined brightest. In Super Bowl 40, he torched the Seahawks for 123 yards and a touchdown on his way to being named Super Bowl MVP. It wasn't just the numbers, it was the tone he set, the physicality, the unselfishness. He'd catch a screen, take a hit to spring a teammate, then turn around and pancake a safety on the next play. He made the dirty work cool, and he did it with joy. By the time he retired, Ward had 1,000 career receptions, 12,083 yards, and 85 touchdowns. Every one of those totals eclipses John Stallworth, the receiver already in Canton from the same franchise. Ward was more productive, played longer, and delivered when it mattered most, and yet his name still lingers on the edge of the conversation. Why? Some say it's because he wasn't graceful, he didn't have Moss's flair or Holt's polish, he didn't win with elegance, he won with effort. Maybe that makes him easier to overlook, but it shouldn't. Hines Ward redefined what it meant to be a wide receiver in Pittsburgh. He gave the position teeth, and he left behind a highlight reel filled with blocks that rattled stadiums and catches that won titles. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't a diva, he was a warrior in a wideout's jersey, and somehow the Hall still hasn't caught up. Coming up, we turn our attention to a receiver whose numbers stack up with legends, but whose quiet rise has kept him just out of football immortality. Most careers peak early. Some burn bright then vanish. But Irving Fryar, his story ran in reverse. He was a top draft pick who didn't blossom until others would have retired. A gifted athlete with a troubled start who found redemption not by chance, but by grit. And by the time he walked away, Fryar had rewritten the rules of longevity for a wide receiver. Yet today, his name is barely whispered in Hall of Fame debates. Fryar came into the league in 1984 as the first overall pick, a rare honor for any receiver, let alone one playing in an era when passing games were still evolving. Coming out of Nebraska, he had everything: speed, strength, size. But in New England, his early years were turbulent. The talent was obvious, but inconsistency followed. Injuries, off-field struggles, flashes of brilliance, but never the sustained greatness expected of a top pick. For a while, it looked like Fryar might become just another what could have been. But instead of fading, he grew, mentally, physically. By the time he joined the Miami Dolphins in 1993, Fryar was 31 years old, and somehow entering his prime. With Dan Marino slinging the ball, Fryar lit up secondaries. In 1994, he posted 1,270 yards and 7 touchdowns. The next year, with the Eagles, he did it again. Then again. At age 35, Fryar caught 88 passes for 1,316 yards. Let that sink in. At a point when most receivers are long gone, Fryar was outproducing players 10 years younger, and he wasn't padding stats. He was carrying offenses. Across his 17-year career, Fryar caught 851 passes for 12,785 yards and 84 touchdowns. His yardage total still ranks in the top 25 all time. He had 5 1,000-yard seasons, 4 of them coming after the age of 30. He played in 255 games, more than any other wide receiver when he retired, and he scored touchdowns in 3 different decades. That's not just impressive, that's unheard of. But here's the mystery. Despite all of that, Fryar remains outside Canton's gates. No gold jacket, no serious campaign. Maybe because his career arc didn't fit the mold. He wasn't dominant from day one, he didn't have the mythical single-season outburst. He just kept producing, quietly, consistently, and for longer than almost anyone. He also played during an awkward era, splitting his career across 3 different teams without ever becoming the definitive face of any one franchise. That might make him easy to overlook, but it shouldn't, because Irving Fryar didn't just survive in the NFL, he reinvented himself. He proved that second acts, and even third ones, can be greater than the first. He was proof that a career isn't about how you start, it's about how long you can stay in the fight and keep winning. Next, we turn to a wideout whose early impact was undeniable, but whose Hall of Fame case remains stuck in limbo, despite a resume that refuses to be ignored. You wouldn't notice him at first. He didn't talk much, didn't dance after touchdowns, didn't stir up headlines, but if you watched closely, if you really watched, you saw something rare. Henry Ellard didn't just play wide receiver, he painted the position. He ran routes like a violinist plays strings, precise, fluid, impossible to duplicate. And for nearly 2 decades, he left defenders twisted and gasping while the cameras focused somewhere else. Ellard came into the league in 1983, a second-round pick out of Fresno State. At the time, most scouts saw him as a return man. He was lightning with the ball in his hands. Small school, big speed. But it didn't take long for the Rams to realize Ellard had more than jets. He had craft. He spent his early years sharing targets and run-heavy offenses, yet still made impact plays that hinted at something bigger. And when the Rams finally let him loose, Ellard answered. In 1988, with Jim Everett under center and the playbook finally tilting toward the air, Ellard erupted for 1,414 yards, leading the entire NFL. He didn't just run go routes and pray, he ran routes, deep outs, double moves, sideline drags, all executed with such detail that defenders routinely turned the wrong way before the ball even left the quarterback's hand. Ellard wasn't overpowering or theatrical, he was a tactician. Every step had purpose, every break had venom. Between 1986 and 1994, Ellard put together 7 1,000-yard seasons, including 3 straight years with over 1,200 yards in Los Angeles. And when he was traded to Washington in the twilight of his career, he didn't fade, he thrived. At 33 years old, he posted 1,397 yards. At 34, over 1,000 again. He produced at an elite level for nearly 12 years. That's not a hot streak, that's a career. By the time he retired, Henry Ellard had compiled 814 catches, 13,777 receiving yards, and 65 touchdowns. He ranked 3rd all-time in receiving yards when he hung up his cleats, trailing only Jerry Rice and James Lofton. Let that settle. 3rd in the history of the NFL. And still, no bust in Canton. Why? Maybe because he never won a Super Bowl. Maybe because his prime came in markets that didn't always dominate the spotlight. Maybe because he wasn't loud enough for voters to remember him, despite the numbers screaming at them from the record books. But the truth is this, Ellard's resume outshines many receivers already in the Hall. He didn't crave attention, he craved separation, and he found it week after week, year after year, until time caught up, but the Hall still hasn't. Henry Ellard was a master of the craft, and sometimes the masters are the ones we overlook the most. Next up, we highlight a receiver whose talent burned white hot from the start, yet whose full legacy is still waiting to be honored. The moment his legend was born, Anquan Boldin had his face broken in 7 places. A violent hit, a shattered sinus, wires in his jaw. Doctors told him it would be weeks, months even, before he could think about football again. He was back in 2, and when he returned, he played like a man who had already looked pain in the eye and told it to move. That was always the story with Boldin. Not the fastest, not the flashiest, but tougher than anyone. And when the game was on the line, he was the one who ripped the ball away from defenders like it belonged to him. And it usually did. He came into the NFL in 2003, a 2nd-round pick with 1st-round talent. Teams were scared off by his 40-yard dash. Too slow, they said, not explosive enough. But in his very first game with the Arizona Cardinals, Boldin dropped 217 yards on the Lions. That wasn't just a debut, that was a declaration. You didn't need to be a burner if you could run routes like poetry and catch anything thrown in your direction, no matter how many defenders were draped on you. In just his 2nd season, he cracked 1,400 yards despite missing time with injury. He was relentless across the middle, fearless on the sideline, and downright punishing after the catch. Boldin didn't avoid contact, he welcomed it. He invited collisions. Some receivers ran around defenders, Boldin ran through them. Over the course of his 14-year career, he stacked over 13,000 receiving yards, nearly 1,100 catches, and 82 touchdowns. That's more than Hall of Famers like Andre Reed. He had 7 seasons of over 1,000 yards, made 3 Pro Bowls, and won Offensive Rookie of the Year. But his biggest contributions came when the lights were brightest. In the 2008 postseason, he fought through injury to help lead Arizona to its first Super Bowl. 5 years later, with the Ravens, he became Joe Flacco's most trusted target during one of the greatest playoff runs of the modern era. era. Boldin torched the Colts, bullied the Patriots, and outmuscled the 49ers under the lights in New Orleans. He didn't just contribute, he carried them when it mattered most, but despite all of it, Boldin is rarely mentioned among the greats. Maybe it's because he played with other stars like Larry Fitzgerald and Steve Smith. Maybe it's because he didn't dance or showboat. He just made the catch, stood up, and walked back to the huddle like it was business as usual. There's nothing flashy about iron, but it holds strong when everything else bends. Anquan Boldin never needed a spotlight. He was the storm that turned games upside down. And if he doesn't have a gold jacket, it's only because toughness doesn't always glitter. But you better believe it leaves a mark. Just ask any corner who tried to cover him. The first time Steve Smith touched the ball in the NFL, he didn't wait for anyone to notice him. He returned the opening kickoff 94 yards for a touchdown. One play, one explosion. And just like that, he announced his arrival with the kind of violence and speed that would come to define his entire career. That wasn't just a return, it was a warning. Because Steve Smith wasn't here to be liked, he wasn't here to follow the script. He was here to make you feel him, physically, emotionally, and on the scoreboard. He came into the league in 2001 as a third-round pick out of Utah. Undersized and underestimated. 5'9", maybe 180 pounds. Too angry, too raw. But the Panthers didn't ask him to be polished, they just asked him to compete. And Smith didn't just compete, he devoured anything in front of him. His rise from return man to premier receiver was volcanic. In 2003, just his third season, he helped carry Carolina to Super Bowl with clutch catches, brutal blocks, and a postseason stat line that read like a revenge tour. But it was in 2005 that Steve Smith delivered one of the greatest receiving seasons in NFL history. 103 catches, 1,563 yards, 12 touchdowns. He didn't just lead the league, he led in all three categories. It was dominance through chaos, and every defense he faced that year walked away bruised. Smith played the game like he had something to prove on every single down, and maybe he did. He never forgot the slight of being overlooked in the draft. He never let go of the chip on his shoulder. That rage, that fire, it became fuel, and it turned him into one of the most dangerous weapons the league had ever seen. Corners feared him, safeties avoided him, coaches couldn't ignore him. Even after Carolina moved on, thinking his best years were behind him, Smith found new life in Baltimore. At 35, he dropped 1,065 yards in his first season with the Ravens, refusing to age, refusing to go quietly. He played like a man who'd been told no one too many times, and he made the entire league pay for it. By the time he retired, Steve Smith had 1,031 receptions, 14,731 receiving yards, and 81 touchdowns. That's top 10 all-time in yardage, more than Andre Reed, more than Chris Carter, more than Randy Moss after age 30. And he did it without ever having a Hall of Fame quarterback, no MVP passers, no Super Bowl wins, just grit, violence, and unmatched will. So why is he still waiting for his gold jacket? Maybe it's because he didn't play politics. Maybe it's because he hurt feelings on his way up. But ask anyone who lined up across from him. They'll tell you the truth. Steve Smith wasn't just great. He was nightmare fuel. He wasn't tall, he wasn't smooth, but he was real, he was raw, and when he got the ball in his hands, it was already too late. Coming up, we look at a receiver whose quiet brilliance and record-setting pace still hasn't earned the recognition it deserves, despite a Hall-worthy legacy hiding in plain sight. And there you have it, 10 wide receivers who changed the game, carved up defenses, and left their mark on NFL history, yet still wait outside the gates of Canton. These aren't just forgotten names, they're proof that greatness isn't always measured by headlines or highlight reels. Sometimes it's measured in toughness and consistency, in the moments only true fans remember. If you felt something watching this, if you found yourself nodding, arguing, or reliving a forgotten touchdown, then this channel is built for you. We tell the stories that deserve to be told even when the Hall of Fame won't. So if you're all about football history, unsung legends, and the players who played with heart over hype, hit that like button, drop your favorite underrated receiver in the comments, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next deep dive into NFL greatness that time tried to erase.